Phyllis Puffer, thank you very much for joining us. You wrote a memoir in which you recount a lot of adventures and a lot of countries you visited. One of those countries is Vietnam, and that's the one that we're focusing on now. You have on your Army uniform. Congratulations that you can still wear that, by the way. I wouldn't be able to pull that off. So congratulations about that. I see that you have the captain's bars there, so we'll want to hear about that. And you got into Vietnam very early, and you were one of the first women with the U.S. Army in Vietnam. And so we'll talk about that. But let's start off just with the question: what motivated you to join the Army in the first place?
Well, when I was a little kid in Upper Michigan, we lived on a farm. Mm-hmm. And it was World War II, and neighbor farm boys were in the Army, and they came back. In those days it was called furlough. Mm-hmm. And we went to see them in the evening. They had kind of open house, and people came over to see the family and see the boys in their uniforms and so on.
Right. Yeah.
And I was absolutely fascinated by the men. Huh. And it stuck with me. And I was just kind of, that was my motivation. No explanation, no rationale. It was a childhood fascination that never left.
Yeah. Oh.
And as I went through junior high, high school, college, it stuck with me. And when I was in college, the Army had a junior program for the women, where you went for 6 weeks and did a kind of a mini basic training. And I did that, and I was still interested, even more interested than before. And the minute I graduated, I joined. Now, the summer, the basic training started in the fall, and I had the summer, and I still, at the same time, wanted to see the world. Mm-hmm. I spent the summer traveling around Central America, spent most of the time in Guatemala. I got the news from home. I had been accepted into the Army. I went to the U.S. Embassy in Guatemala, was sworn into the Army in the U.S. Embassy in Guatemala. And then when I came back to the U.S., I reported to basic training at Fort McClellan, Alabama.
Now, what year was that? What year was that when you went?
That would be, I think, 62, maybe 61, in there somewhere. Maybe 59.
So, all right, so, yeah, because the question I'm getting at is, at that time, 59, 60, early 62, yeah. Did Vietnam, Vietnam is not really much of an issue at that time. Was it, were you aware of it? Yeah.
It was, the rumblings were just starting, and it was starting to get serious. About the time I left, things were getting quite serious. There were 62, 61, something like that. There were vague stories of attacks on our soldiers, individual soldiers. There were demonstrations. I didn't understand it. I I didn't know, I wasn't a big news follower or newspaper follower, and it frightened me, it concerned me. I knew enough to not to tell a lot of people that I was in the Army or going to go to Vietnam, and I never really understood all of that problem.
Wow. So you're, when you joined the Army, then it was mostly just sort of sounds like a way to travel and have interesting experiences and get paid for it. You're not really thinking, the way some young men might, that, I want to go to war somewhere.
Getting paid for it didn't enter the equation at all.
No.
I've never been interested in the income part of anything. That's never been a motivation for anything I've ever done.
Oh, okay.
It was a fascination with something, an interest in this thing.
In military.
In the military, yeah, in the military.
Yeah.
I read about it. It's the same thing is why I much later went into the academic life in sociology. I just became fascinated with this thing called sociology, and it was the same thing.
Yeah, wow. So you go through basic training. One of the interesting things you mentioned in the chapter in your memoir about Vietnam, you say that the soldiers didn't seem to know whether to treat you like a woman or like a fellow soldier.
Correct.
Could you just, spell that out? Because, of course, that's a very different time. The early 60s is that's really a continuation of the 50s, really, the early 60s.
Yes.
Very different from, the early 21st century. What did that look like? I mean, when these guys, I imagine you have enlisteds who probably aren't accustomed to saluting a woman officer, and I'm just interested in your recollections on that. Just, the guys not knowing quite how do I treat this officer like a woman or like a fellow soldier?
Yes. As I said, it gave me a lot of freedom of choice. Very unusual for someone in the military.
Yeah.
And the big example was ambush training. Our unit had been alerted for Vietnam, and a very important part of that was ambush training because, of course, they would be flown to Vietnam. Well, actually, most of them went by boat. But there was land. They would be landed at a port, but then they would have to be transported by land to Saigon, where there would be headquarters. And that was, when they would be transported by land, actually by truck, was very dangerous. Early in the war, the Viet Cong were very successful with ambushes. They had developed excellent techniques for cutting off part of a convoy, isolating a section, and then decimating that particular section. So they were putting a lot of effort into meeting that particular threat. Well, so they had decided, well, first of all, they had decided to leave me back in the U.S., and that didn't please me at all. Mm-hmm. So I talked to whoever needed to be talking to, and people guided me. You need to talk to this person and this person and this person. So I did all that.
Yeah.
And then with they had finally said, okay, she can go. And then we came to the ambush training. Well, they said I didn't need to do the ambush training, but I decided that that's something I should do. So I joined the ambush training. That involved learning to fire the weapon. And they gave me a pistol, and then I discovered everybody else had rifles, and so I wanted a rifle. So that meant I had a pistol and a rifle, which was twice as much weaponry as anybody else had.
So now you're better armed than the guys, actually.
So we did, along the way in there somewhere, we did target practice. So I decided I need to do target practice. Now I did that with the pistol. Now you have someone with you. The person who fires the pistol has someone right next to them. So I fired the pistol. I don't remember whether I hit the target or not. So then it was my turn to stand by the person who was a young man, and I could tell he was extremely nervous. And I don't think he hit the target at all. And I know it's because I was standing beside him. The poor guy was nearly dead from nerves.
Yeah, yeah.
And the getting, okay, you had to get into a truck in order to be trucked from one point to the next. And the truck, I'd never seen such big trucks. The truck was almost as high off the ground as I was. How I ever got in that truck, I will never know. But somehow, the anxiety of the situation gave me enough strength to get into that truck. So I got in the truck, and then I had to get out of the truck, and then I had to get back in the truck. I managed all of that. It was because of sheer anxiety.
Yeah. So you didn't experience sort of the old-fashioned chivalry thing where guys would want to step in and assist. In these cases, they would let you, just you're on your own the way the rest of us.
They were more frozen in these situations. They didn't know, should they assist? Should they leave me alone? Should they assist? Should they leave me alone? We came to the simulated chemical attack, which would be like gas attacks, something like that.
Yeah.
And I didn't know, the men all had some kind of training in this already, which I had not.
Okay.
And there was one fellow who was kind of fatherly. We kind of fell together by force of circumstances, and he knew what to do, and he could see very clearly I had no idea what to do, and he kind of guided me. And when we came to the gas attack, he kind of pulled me by himself, and we went down and kind of sheltered against a kind of a rise in the land, and he shared his poncho or whatever it was with me, so both of us were covered. And it was kind of what he would do with another soldier anyway who might have lost a poncho or something like that. It was maybe more of a brother situation.
Yeah, yeah. But it sounds like you could just tell that the guys weren't always sure what to do.
Yes, they weren't sure, but the military and the situation kind of ruled, which would have been that way if you had a minority of some kind, and the military is a major aid to minorities anyway. It's a major escalator of upward mobility.
Sure.
Because the military situation rules no matter who you are, what you look like.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, certainly that's the case for me, that the military was opened all sorts of doors. But yeah, I mean, you're in the military you're in. By the time you get there, it's been desegregated for what, more than 12, 13, 14 years, something like that. And so all of those differences have to go away in the interest of the common mission, right?
Yes.
So one of the questions I had was, let's say somebody asked you a week before you actually leave for Vietnam. What is that? What is that Vietnam thing all about? What's going on over there?
I would not have been able to say. I would not have been able to say. I didn't know.
Wow.
All I knew was I was in the Army. Soldiers go to war. I was a soldier. I wanted to go to war.
Wow.
That's all I knew.
Yeah. So, all right. So then, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's kind of what a bedrock basic soldier's attitude is.
Yeah.
I didn't know the attitudes of the other soldiers around me. For the men, I think it might have been more complex. The other soldiers around me might have understood more of what was going on.
Mm-hmm. What was it in your mind? I mean, did you link it in your mind to the struggle against communism, the Cold War?
Well, now that yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Vaguely, that yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you knew that this was part of the basic Cold War struggle against communism?
Yes, I knew that the Viet Cong were communists and we were against communists, and that end of story.
Yeah, yeah. So what was your job? You use a phrase in your memoir. You have the phrase, I'm looking at it now, that you refer to your enjoyable year at a desk in Saigon.
Yes.
Yeah, what was your job in Vietnam?
I was an editor, and it's the Army. The Army does a lot of writing. They produce reams of reports and stacks of booklets. They're a major publishing house.
Sure.
And it's not that I was that good at grammar and capitals and where you put the commas. It's that I was better than anybody else.
Well, I can say the chapter that I read in your memoir about Vietnam is very, very well written. It's very lively writing.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So
yes.
You're really skilled with the language.
My high point as an editor was a desperate call from the commanding general's office to come straighten out a report he was trying to make for like General Westmoreland or somebody or other, that they couldn't get past somebody or other because of these little things. And when I saw it, I could see, yeah, it really needed some help.
Okay.
And that was quite exciting to respond to the general's call.
So you had a lot of Excuse me, then. So if I understand correctly, you had a lot of documents coming at you, and your job was to go through them and to make sure they, basically they were clear, they were grammatically correct, and so on. Were these documents like after action reports, like reports on ambushes, reports on battles? What sorts of documents were you?
Yes. We were, okay, after a battle, part of our personnel went to the battlefield and went through the bodies and their knapsacks and clothing to get anything that was written.
Right.
And that written material was taken to another section to be translated. Now, those translations were quite literal. And most Americans reading them would not be able to understand them.
Okay, yeah.
So the problem was to put the English into English. And I did the rewriting, and I would have to do a lot of talking with the translator about what this really meant. Now, also, I had meetings with the translators on English, how you turn these words, these literal translations, into understandable English. So I did a lot of English teaching.
Oh, translator help that process along.
Yes.
Yeah.
The translators were good translators, but there is a lot to translating. You just don't do word by word, which is what they could do.
Yeah.
Translating is also making it understandable to a native speaker.
Right. Well, and as you're reading these documents, letters or other documents taken from,
journals, diaries
taken from dead Viet Cong, did you feel like, you say that when you got into Vietnam, you really didn't have a sense of what was going on, but I'm wondering how your thinking changed or what insights you gained as you're reading this material taken from the enemy. Did that, what sorts of things did you learn from reading and translating or working with the translations of that material?
They were as unknowledgeable as I was.
Oh.
And they were coming from the north to the south through Laos along what we call the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
Right, yeah.
Their greatest danger and their greatest fear, which I found very amusing, tigers.
Oh, really?
Their greatest fear and their greatest danger was being attacked along that trail by tigers.
Wow.
And I thought that was kind of amusing.
That's interesting. I was just talking to a veteran just a few days ago, and he said that one of his guys was dragged off by a tiger.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, in our army too. Was he special forces?
No, he was up on the DMZ at Con Thien. Or I don't. Maybe he was relating a story he had heard or something. But there was that. You just mentioned the concern about tigers.
Tigers is a very big deal.
Yeah, but he would not have said that his primary concern was tigers. His primary concern would be the NVA or the VC. But you're
Yeah.
saying these guys coming down from the north, they're less worried about the Americans than they are about tigers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your sense from reading this material from these guys is that they were what? They were just sort of ordinary guys worried about ordinary stuff. There's not a lot of politics. Did you come across like a lot of fanatical, communist stuff, or was it more like
not as I remember. Now, while I was there, one of the big news magazines, I can't remember whether it was Life, whether it was Time, it might have been Saturday Evening Post, but I don't think so, published a diary of one of those Viet Cong.
Really? Wow.
And everybody thought it was one of ours. And no, it wasn't, but it could have been. And that diary was very true to life, very, very much what we read.
Some people thought the diary was one of ours because just the theme sounded so...
Everything, yeah, it was very, very much like one we put out. Now, ours were classified, so they would not have known ours at all.
Yeah.
But it seemed like, because they knew we did capture documents, and they knew it would have been somebody coming down.
Oh, okay. By one of ours, you mean one of the diaries that you had been involved in translating? Oh, okay. Yeah. At first I thought you meant one of like an American soldier's diary or something.
Yeah.
No,
the one that we translated. And I was trying to remember, was there anything about missing family? Was there anything about girlfriends? And I don't remember anything about that. It's something that comes to mind now.
Yeah. I mean, that might actually say something, that it could be that, these diaries and other things you're translating are so just sort of have to do with ordinary life stuff that there aren't really any particularly powerful passages that were burned in your memory. Yeah.
No, that society is not big on girls and romance anyway, where you're getting arranged marriages, and it's a different society, and they did not then have the same preoccupations. We have a huge culture of romance.
Right.
And a lot of societies don't have that.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I want to, you mentioned a young Vietnamese gal named Kim, and we'll talk about her. But I did want to go back. You're in Vietnam in 1962. You go in 1962. That is very early. I mean, the U.S. doesn't have much presence in Vietnam at that time.
Yes. We were always told, I always said that I was there at the beginning of the big American build-up. And we could see it, the building where I lived, the paint was barely dry when we moved in. Buildings for American military were going up constantly. Very new. We were taking over their hotels, their apartments, rapidly. We had, at the end of a year, the women had a get-together. Well, at the beginning of the year, we had a little get-together, maybe 5 women. At the end of the year, we filled a big and one of those long tables in a dining hall
Yeah.
full of women.
Yeah, but you were one of the very first women in, right, into Vietnam?
Yes,
Yeah.
and I was in an all-male organization.
Yeah, I think the numbers I forget, was it 2,000 guys and you're the one woman, or 500 guys and you're the one woman? I forget.
It was I was in a military group, and I have to say I never knew how many people there were. There were just an awful lot.
And you were the only one. The only female.
Yeah, I thought that was cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for that reason, it's great to talk to you. So you're doing translation work, but you would be classified as an intelligence officer, right?
Yes, I was in intelligence, and within that, I was an editor.
Editor within that.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned in the memoir that at that time the war was in the country, and the city was pretty peaceful.
Oh yeah.
Although it sounds like in your memoir you still have to watch out in the city. But it sounds like overall you felt pretty safe in Saigon.
Yes. Yeah. Part of it was a natural oblivion, but part of it was safe, and I was not aware of anybody who worried about anything.
No.
Toward the end of that year, I heard an explosion once in a while. One poor guy told me that he had set out for one night place, and before he got there, it had been blown up. So he set out for another one, and before he got there, it had been blown up.
Oh boy!
I think there was a third one. He just gave up and went back home.
Yeah. So there were some things happening in Saigon, and you mentioned
toward the end.
Yeah.
There were things, and there were places that we were told we shouldn't go, and I was careful.
Yeah, and you mentioned in your memoir that you saw some of the political unrest in Saigon, as well as sort of the demonstrations and things like that.
Yes, I'm trying to remember now. Did I say I actually saw them or knew about them? I think I just knew.
Okay, so you knew that there were demonstrations, Buddhist demonstrations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I just knew about them.
Yeah.
Or maybe heard them.
Yeah.
We were careful to say, and there were curfews.
Mm-hmm.
Things were going on. And we heard stories about people who had gotten caught, Americans who had gotten caught in a demonstration. I do remember I was out walking in an area with my boyfriend of the moment, and some little kids started following us and shouting at us. And we didn't hurry up, but we did move along and got out of there. And he knew the town. He had a job which enabled him to move around. He knew the town. And he got to looking at a map and thinking about where we had been. And he said we had wandered into an area where we really shouldn't have been.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But compared with what could have happened, that was a very mild incident and very unusual for me.
Yeah. Now you said that, when you went to Vietnam, you really, didn't have a real sense of what was going on, general awareness that it has to do with communism. Did you, when you left Vietnam, do you feel like you had a better sense of what was going on?
No, I was very upset at leaving.
Really, you wanted to stay?
Yes, I very much wanted to stay, and I understood, I believe I understood that a lot of us felt that way. I came home kicking and screaming. One of the reasons I did not want to come back, now the officers had a career pattern that gave you experience in different areas. They wouldn't let you specialize in one area. And that's where I would have been happier in enlisted, because enlisted you could specialize in one area.
Yeah.
And I wanted to stay in intelligence. So they left me, I think they gave me a little extra time there, but I came back. I had accumulated leave. I took extra time, and I went to, I did a delay en route. I went to Malaysia, Penang, Australia, New Zealand. I had enough time to very clearly make up my mind about what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And they were bringing me back for troop duty, which meant if I had troop duty was a very valuable assignment. You would be in charge of a company of women. I knew that this was a valuable assignment. I knew they had marked me for higher command, and I was still mad.
Because you wanted to be back in Vietnam.
I wanted to be back in Vietnam. I wanted to remain in intelligence.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
When I reported for duty back at Fort McClellan, the woman who checked me and said, "Welcome to Fort McClellan," and I said, "Thank you, I'm quitting."
Oh, really? Wow.
And the commander, of course, was disappointed when I had my little meeting with the commander.
Yeah. So now, why did you want to stay in Vietnam? What was about it that was what was it about it that was so attractive?
I loved the duty. I loved the job. I loved being in intelligence. I loved being in Saigon. It wasn't a war for me. I had an absolutely incredible social life.
Well, I mean, is that because you're a rare commodity, an American woman surrounded by hundreds of American men?
That explains the social life.
Yeah, sure.
I would have liked it anyway. Saigon was full of French restaurants. I ate extremely well in beautiful little restaurants.
Wow. Yeah.
I learned about wine. I got to meet French women. I got to meet Vietnamese women of all classes. I could see a little bit of life when it was a colony.
Yeah, because you are there really early. I mean, the French had left not very long before, and so
yes. I used to sit on the veranda at the Hotel Continental. If you've been to New Orleans,
yeah,
there is a is it a hotel, a restaurant, huge veranda, little tables.
Mhm.
You look up and see the fans in the
Sure.
ceiling.
Yeah, yeah.
I say, now tell me again, why am I against colonialism?
Yeah, yeah.
It's simply a beautiful, beautiful life.
And you heard a lot of French spoken.
Yeah, and I did not in those days speak French.
No, but there was a lot of French still being spoken at that time.
Yeah, I didn't hear it. They were learning English as fast as they could. As a matter of fact, there was an American organization there, which was their job was to teach English. And I got to know one of the teachers, and I barely remember.
So it sounds like you kind of witnessed sort of that transitional phase, right? The French are out, the American presence is growing, and so some of the locals are shifting from French to English.
Yes, and it was still how you could tell the pedicab drivers. Now the pedicab was a wonderful innovation. You can see them all over. Well, I have seen them in other countries also.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a buggy, and it's pulled, generally speaking, by a man. When I got there, the pedicab drivers did not speak English. When I left, they spoke English. Enough English so that you could tell them where you wanted to go.
So you're smart business people there.
Yes,
yeah.
They knew where the business was.
Do you feel fortunate to have been in Vietnam, so early, when, most people aren't paying any attention, rather than say 2 or 3 years later when it was a much trickier situation? Just looking back on your own personal experience, do you feel fortunate that you were there so early?
I have never thought about that one way or the other. I would have felt fortunate to have been there at any point.
Yeah.
Because at any point it was a unique experience.
Oh, sure.
Now, if I had been a man, even if I had been a man, I'm not so sure if I had been in combat. Now, what most of us do not understand is how few soldiers are actually in combat.
Right. Yeah.
Have forgotten the percentage. A very, very small proportion of our soldiers, now it's women as well as men,
right,
actually fight. It's a huge percentage that are support troops. We have a very technical army. It takes a lot of support.
Well, so as we begin to wind down, as you went into Vietnam, you said you had this kind of a vague, this is about the struggle against communism, but not paying a lot of attention to the details. If somebody said, what's that war really about, other than maybe a general statement about communism, no real details there. When you look back on the Vietnam War now, what are your thoughts as you look back on it now?
Actually, again, it's only personal experience, but just recently there was on the television, it might have been another Ken Burns thing, but somebody did an in-depth analysis. You might know.
Yeah, it was Ken Burns, the Vietnam War.
Ken Burns on the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And I got to see it. Something happened. I didn't see the last part. But if I had known, I had not realized that this was a war of independence right from the very beginning. They fought against the French, and then they fought against us.
Yeah.
If I had known that, it would have changed my attitude entirely. I didn't know it.
I don't think at that time many people did. I think the communism thing was so intense. That was kind of the vision that everyone had, and didn't really see the independence thing.
Yes, our fear of communism now, as we look at it, was pathological. But it was real.
It was real, yeah.
And if you look back at Germany and the Berlin Wall, if you look at tremendous controversy, who lost China, the Korean War, the fear of, well, we had our McCarthy era, and that was built on the fear of communism. That was real.
Sure.
It's over with now for a long time, and well, before that, we get worried about things, and they have some basis in fact.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the only thing.
I think that's right, and yeah, I think, I agree with what you say. You look back now and realize that, had our leaders been able to understand that for Ho Chi Minh, this was primarily about nationalism, not primarily about communism, and he probably would have been glad to chuck communism if he could have gotten help on the nationalism side. And so you look back and regret that we weren't able to see that, but as you say, sort of the spirit of the moment was very much sort of a fixation on communism. So if he's a communist, then that's what gets fixated on.
Yeah. It's very hard to evaluate the past because it's very hard to appreciate the thinking at that time.
At that time, yeah, that's right. That's right.
It seems silly now. It seems weird now. But communism is vanquished now. And it wasn't then.
Sure. Yeah.
But anyway, it's happened, and
yeah. So it sounds like you look back and one of the things that you wish we could run the tape over again and realize that for Ho Chi Minh, just using him really as a symbol, it was mainly a nationalism thing, and
it was nationalist. Actually, I almost never think of it now.
Really?
Almost never.
Yeah.
I thought, and again, when I do, I think of it just as a personal experience it was.
Yeah.
And I've only thought about it at all in this past little period because it's an anniversary and everybody it's become an academic topic, a historical topic.
Right.
But it's still for me a personal experience and a personal adventure.
Yeah. When you see guys with their Vietnam veteran hats on, do you have a sense of camaraderie with them? Or?
Yes.
You do? Do you sometimes talk to them?
I'm living now in an area in eastern Kentucky where the military is strong. A high proportion of the population has served in the military.
Yeah.
And we have, for Veterans Day, there are organizations that put on dinners, and I enjoy a free dinner, and I go and I kind of enjoy participating. But for me, that's in the present. It's something I do in the present, and again, the past kind of sits in the past.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't enter my present life very much.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's just one last question. I probably should have asked this one earlier, but you do tell you relate the story in the chapter of your memoir on Vietnam. You relate the story of Kim the bar girl,
Yes.
and and she ends up marrying an American, if I remember correctly, and that. Um, just what are the things that come to mind when I mention that to you? Because of the reason I bring it up is because of course, as the American military presence grows, then sort of the club scene grows along with it, and that has all kinds of implications for a lot of young women throughout South Vietnam, and also in the Philippines and Thailand and other places where
Yes.
service personnel are going. Just what are your memories about kind of that scene that was developing when you were there?
I was very impressed by her.
Mm.
I haven't thought about her really in years and years and years. I have no idea where she is or what happened.
Yeah.
She certainly got herself a good man,
Mm.
who is undoubtedly a college professor now somewhere.
Mm.
He was, they were in college the last I saw her, the last I visited, in a very good college. I admire her adaptability, her self-confidence, her intelligence, her poise. She was no fading violet in any way. And it'd be interesting to see what she's doing now.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So bar girl, but clearly, not to sound like she was too calculating, but she's a bar girl, but she saw her chance and
yes,
took it.
and the bar girls did. And the bar girls did. They knew a good thing when they saw it. Yeah. And latching on to an American was obvious to anyone.
Yeah.
That was a very good thing.
It's kind of a ticket out of what then was a very poor society. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if they were poor.
If her particular family was, okay.
Okay, I don't remember that clearly.
Yeah. No. Yeah, I mean, it may be that her particular family wasn't, but the society generally.
Yeah.
And so to be able to marry an American and come to
maybe not. It was agriculturally extremely rich.
I understand what you mean by that. Yeah.
Yes. I think it was not a poor country. The crops were abundant. They had lots of water. The soil was fertile. And I'm thinking that might have been one of the tragedies because it was a wealthy country, agriculturally. And the people did have enough to eat.
A tragedy because just because of the disruption of the war?
Well, in a sense, they didn't have to fight for anything. They had what they needed. They didn't have to fight to get something. I never had the sense it was a poor country. People might have the idea it was a poor country because they did have fighting and so on, so they must have been fighting for something. I think it was they were fighting more because of this independence thing.
Right.
We got involved in the war to save the French, I think.
Well, early on, we assisted the French. Yeah.
There was Dien Phu.
Yeah.
Well, anyway.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
Well,
I'm
kind
sorry?
of a way.
Kind of a waste. Yeah.
But
But,
now that I know it was a war of independence,
mm,
that's why I think.
yeah. Well, I mean, all these years, these 50 plus years later, I mean, Vietnam seems to be a country on the rise. You know, and although the government is still, you know, communist, so-called, the economy certainly isn't, and Vietnam is on the rise, and it's in many ways a very impressive country. I'm going back for the third time in a few months here. Some of that. Yeah. Well, Phyllis, I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your memories. It's great to talk to one of the first women in, I mean, not only one of the first women into Vietnam, but someone who was there so early and kind of has a perspective of the Vietnam War before it really becomes a Vietnam War in most people's minds. You
Yes.
saw that very early phase. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It's been very interesting and enjoyable to talk about it, and might even give me some perspective.